Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Prioritizing Investment Decisions with Company Growth Data. I'm Michelle Daly, Head of Demand at Affinity, and I'm joined today by Product Marketing Manager Jen Teets, sorry Jen, Product Manager Kat Wang, and Strategic Account Manager Megan Cox. Before I pass you over to our panel, I wanted to answer a couple of frequently asked questions. We are recording today's webinar and we'll share it with attendees after the event. We'll also be taking questions which you can submit at any time in the Q&A box. Any questions we don't get to, we'll answer offline after the event. And now over to Jen.
Thanks, Michelle, and welcome everyone. We're happy to have you. I'm Jen Teets, and today I have Megan and Kat with me, joining to discuss our new company growth data set, Affinity Data Organizations, to explore how teams can use company growth data to help prioritize their investment decisions. It seems like everyone at this point is aware that they should be investing in and making data-driven decisions, but are still trying to understand what data they should rely on and how to most efficiently and effectively implement it into their deal-making processes. Today, Kat is going to walk through the value company growth data can provide for investment teams, as well as a few ways to leverage this data at each stage in your pipeline. Then Megan will bring us live into Affinity to show this data in action, and we'll end our time together with a sneak peek into what's coming next for Affinity data. So let's get started talking about our new Affinity data add-on package, Organizations, diving into the company growth data and insights it provides for investment teams.
Thanks, Jen. So one of the frequent questions that we get asked is, why did we decide to start with headcount and growth data? Sort of stepping back, we took a look at our users and potential future users, and we realized that a lot of investment decisions are based on what the current company size is and the current company trajectory. We know that our VC investors do have a certain check size that they typically invest in. So for example, I may invest in early seed stage startups, or I might invest in growth stage startups. So having a current company headcount is really important to making sure that you're only looking at the right companies and spending your time talking to actual potential investments. The second category of data that we have is growth trends. So we have both historical headcount and month-over-month, quarter-over-quarter, and year-over-year growth data. The reason why this data we feel is very powerful is growth rates for headcount is one of the strongest ways to predict company trajectory and is industry best practice right after looking at revenue numbers.
Thanks, Kat. Now that we have a better understanding of company growth data, can you walk us through why teams should use Affinity data for this data?
That's a great question, Jen. So there's two main reasons why you should look to Affinity to be your data provider for headcount and headcount growth rates. The first is that when we look at best-in-class data providers, especially those that are focused in the startup space, we actually have about 2x the coverage that they do. This means that we have about 2x the number of companies and data on those companies. So when you or your teammates take a look at a new company or potential investment, there's a much higher chance that we have data if you go with Affinity data. And what that means is that you'll be saving a lot of time from not having to go do manual pulling or looking at data by searching the internet. The second reason why Affinity data is a good choice is because it's integrated directly into your CRM. What this means is that whenever you or your team have an email or a meeting, we'll automatically create a profile for that company and also put all of the new columns that you would have access to on that profile. From there, within minutes, you would have access to an accurate current headcount, historical headcounts, and also headcount growth rates. So from the moment that you or your team start considering a company or potential investment, you'll have all the right data integrated directly into your CRM to make those data-driven decisions that makes good investors stand out.
That sounds great, Kat. Tell us a little bit more about what's powering Affinity data. Where does this data come from?
That's a good question. So Affinity data organizations headcount growth is sort of one of our first of many data packages that we hope to release in the future. So we do have 12 different data sources and partnerships where we're getting headcount growth data and other types of data from our data partners. All of that data goes into our proprietary ML and aggregation algorithm, which either chooses the best data source or calculates a third data point based on a bunch of different inputs. So that's how we get both the higher coverage, so 2x the coverage of our competitors, and also higher accuracy.
Very cool. And with access to these data points, I imagine that it makes things like early stage qualification a lot easier to complete. Could you maybe walk us through some of the use cases for this data, let's say before a deal closes?
Yeah, definitely. We're hoping that this data set will be useful both before the deal closes and after the deal closes. Let's sort of walk through those two separately. So starting at top of funnel, we're hoping that this data will be very useful in early sourcing. So we do know that as a VC, you might have to look at thousands of companies or potentially consider thousands of companies every single year. And one of the things that a VC firm is most strapped for is really time and resources. So you really want to be smart about what companies you're actually spending time talking to and doing diligence on. So we have a couple of columns that really help you narrow that down. We have current headcount. So once again, you can narrow down a list of thousands of companies to just a couple hundred to fit those that are actually within your investment size. The next thing that you can do is you can actually use our growth data, for example, year over year growth, to prioritize within those couple hundred so that you're really looking at the companies that are showing the strongest historical growth and are most likely to succeed and really take off. The other use case that we have is that we do have leadership hires and departures, which is another great indicator for you to bring companies that you previously put on hold or on a watch and nurture list and add it back to the top of your funnel. So for example, if I previously looked at a company that was too small or not mature enough, but still quite interesting and fits my firm's investment thesis, I can go back and filter that list for headcount growth, and also leadership hires, see that they're at a new mature stage and add it back into the companies that I'm actively considering. We also have one last very powerful use case, which actually lets you track whether or not, when doing diligence, your team is spending their valuable time correctly. So one of the unique things that Affinity does as a CRM is that we will automatically ingest all of your communication data, both from calendars and emails. So we do allow you, if you have Affinity Analytics, to do analysis to check whether or not your team is spending the right amount of time talking through emails and meetings with the highest growing companies. And Megan will demo that in the product shortly.
Very cool. Looking forward to that. Before we jump into that demo, these use cases are great, but could you maybe walk us through some use cases where this growth data could be used to support portfolio companies?
Yeah, that's a good question. Once again, we designed this data set to hopefully be useful to the most number of users. And also we really designed it with the idea of supporting the entire workflow of an investment professional. So after the deal closes, we know that that's not the end of the job. There's still all the work that goes into monitoring the portfolio company and really setting it up to succeed. So that's really what our use cases are built around. So in terms of monitoring, as a VC, you might get, let's say, quarterly updates from your investments or portfolio companies. But our headcount and recent hires and departures, along with executive hires and departures, allows you to keep an accurate pulse on what's going on. So if a company is really taking off, you can proactively reach out and congratulate them. Or on the flip side, if we're seeing a lot of churn or key leadership departures, that might be a really good opportunity for you to reach out and provide some support. So specifically, one of the other use cases that we have is really around talent placement. We know that talent placement is one of the best ways to really multiply your impact at an early stage company, especially if you're placing into an executive or VP role. So we do have monitoring for executive level departures so that when there is a departure, you can really quickly proactively reach out and help place the right person to lead that company forward to success. The last use case that we have is actually sort of circling back to your top of funnel. We do show where recent leadership departures go. So that's another great way to find potential new startups that might be interesting for your investment team to look at. So for example, if we have a VP of engineering from one of your portfolio companies leaving to go to a pre-seed or Series A startup, that's a pretty good signal that you might want to take a second look at that other company.
Very cool. Thanks, Kat. That was super informative. Megan, I think you're going to take us through a demo now, but just transferring over to you. Any last thoughts, Kat, before we jump in and see some of this data in action?
We're really excited for user feedback and also to see if this will be useful in improving efficiency for everyone's time. Our hope is that we designed a package that provides robust coverage with high accuracy and also really supports the entire investor workflow.
Thanks, Kat. Over to you, Megan.
All right. So the best way to see this is in action. So I'm going to go ahead and switch screens here and jump into our demo. So I'm going to stop share for a second. All right. So what you're seeing now is a typical Affinity deals list. And so as Kat mentioned, the biggest use case we see for VC and PE investors looking for top of funnel signals on how to prioritize deals. And so they want to use this growth data as a proxy for revenue and potential. And from that, we can separate the wheat from the chaff, quickly right within our deal flow lists. So the first use case that I'm showing here on my screen is really that growth investor use case. So I've taken a list from all of my deals. I have separated down and filtered to just our top of funnel introduction status. I've also limited the companies to those that have 50 to 500 employees. So within that growth range, I was a little expansive there. And then I've also filtered, sorted by that year-over-year growth number. So what I've done is filtered and surfaced the most interesting, fastest growing companies at the top of our funnel. But then what I've done is paired that with the funding date, because for example, ChartHop, interesting, high growth, right in our employee count range, but they just got funding. So I'm actually going to move them, instead of reaching out to them now, I'm going to move them to our tracking list because it's not time for us to reach out to them. They don't need funding. That said, Oyster Point, also in that range that looks very attractive. They got funding a couple of years ago. So I'm actually going to move forward with them, reach out. And then once I've done that introduction and intro email, I'm going to move them into the next status, that meeting status. So this is a great way to very quickly see at the top of the funnel, the companies that you're looking at and filtering to the ones that are the most interesting. Because this is a saved view within your Affinity list, any companies that fit this description, so introduction status, 50 to 500 employees, will automatically be added to this list. And then if it's sorted again with that growth rate, you can come back and check to see if there are new companies that might be of interest. Now, on the flip side, you can do the reverse and filter out companies that are less interesting. So in this case, the filters here are, we're at the introduction status. Again, we're looking at companies with 50 to 500 employees, but I've sorted in reverse by negative growth rate. So I could actually go in here and just start saying, you know what, I don't think Gear Launch, given their growth rate and given where they're at, probably not a great fit for us. So I'm going to, so not a fit. I'm going to go ahead and confirm that and move them out of our funnel. But I can also take a deeper dive here. Now, for example, Qualia, has COVID hit them hard? Is this a business model we want to invest in? Or is this a blip on an otherwise interesting and potentially below the radar company? I could also pair this data with those employee departures and hires data to see, are there additional signals going on that are surfacing? Are there other red flags? Or again, are there good signals that potentially other investors are missing? But overall, this view is going to save you time as you're doing that filtering at the top of the funnel. Now, at the beginning, I moved one of those companies to our watch list because it wasn't time to raise yet. So here, my next screen, what I'm showing is that tracking list. So these are companies that fit our criteria, the 50 to 500 employees. I'm sorting here on growth rate quarter over quarter, but I'm really tracking to make sure that their growth rate fits and they're ready for funding. So I could actually sort by oldest funding date if I wanted to see, maybe Segmentify, it's time to reach out to them and pull them back to the top of the funnel and get that conversation started again. But overall, what I want to do here is make sure that I'm keeping these conversations warm. These are interesting companies for us. So I want to make sure that that the founders know who we are. And one way I can do that is to come here into triggers and set a reminder trigger so that any company in the tracking status, where it doesn't matter who's the owner, I want to make sure that someone is reaching out to them within 90 days, or I want to get a notification. This is a great way to set it and forget it and know that you'll be reminded to follow up with these founders. All right, so another variation on this theme. So we have too early to raise, but another variation would be they're just too small right now. So here I have another variation of this where the employee count is under 50. They're either tracking or on hold for some reason, and we're just waiting for them to reach that inflection point where we want to reach out, where we think they're ready for us. So here, for example, Cloud Insight, probably still too early, not interesting growth. Anduin, on the other hand, they're just hitting that threshold. They look like they're growing at a good clip, especially year over year. Maybe it's time to reach back out to them. And in this case as well, we want to set that reminder trigger, come back here and keep that relationship warm until we're ready to either say, you know what, we want to move forward with this, or this is not a good company for us. So Cloud Insight, for example, let's go ahead and move them to past. So finally, in our process of sourcing and in that deal flow pipeline, once we get a little further down the pipe, we've already gone through that initial conversation, they're in the meeting status or in due diligence. You can also set up a view here where we're definitely tracking the growth rate. So year over year, we're tracking the employee number. But what I'm looking for here is more signals on leadership. So for example, Bloomscape, a little less interesting. They have a negative 8% growth rate quarter over quarter. Year over year, it's okay. But if I click in here, I see that they just hired a CEO. So potentially, again, under the radar, maybe it's the right time, right before, maybe this is the inflection point where they're going to turn things around. Probably time to do a little more due diligence on them. All right, so these are just some of the ways that we see our customers leveraging this organizational growth data in Affinity. But our customers who are best utilizing this data are prioritizing their time by organizing it in analytics. And so doing this, they're able to surface more quickly the most interesting companies and red flags. So here's a dashboard of a few use cases where we can sort of organize and prioritize our time based on this growth data. At the top, we have our key KPIs. So are we prioritizing the fastest growing companies like we want to? It looks like yes, but we also have a number with negative growth. So I would want to dig into that. Then we can pair this with our communications data. So because Affinity is syncing with your email and calendar data, that data exhaust will help us determine, are we spending the right amount of time with those positive growth companies? Are we emailing and meeting with them more? In this case, it looks like we have a little bit of work to do. Now, reflecting, sort of mirroring what I showed you in the list view, we can look at charts that are helpful at the top of the funnel. What are the top fastest growing companies we know in our network? When we get a little bit further down the funnel, again, we want to pair that data with that communications data. Who is growing fast, but who we haven't contacted yet? So I can take this data and say for Calibrate or Oyster, why haven't we reached out? I could, for example, bring this with me to our Monday meeting and talk to the team more in depth about what's going on with these companies. Another variation on this would be actually calling out the number of meetings and emails for each company. So Source Graph, we're doing a great job, great growth rate, in line with what we're looking for, and we're reaching out to them on a regular basis. Next Health, on the other hand, we've got some work to do. So those are some of the ways that you can use this data in your sourcing and vetting process. But as Kat mentioned, you can also use this data once you do the deal, and we're looking more at the portfolio management piece. So post-investment, the first thing that I would call out is the highlighting of leaders and laggards, or identifying emerging stars in your portfolio or those risks. On the risk side, on the left, here we can see who the departures are, that company and their growth rate. So here we're looking at Zenefits, and maybe there's some work to do here. We probably need to get in touch with them and understand what's going on here. On the flip side, we have Zilch Technology, where they've made some interesting hires, and they have a very fast growing rate year over year. So want to make sure that we are spending the time with them, and then we can pair that data again with that communications data to see where, if we are emailing with them, if we're spending more time with our star portfolio companies. Lastly, taking it a step further from portfolio management and observation to portfolio support, the biggest use case for the Affinity data organization's data set would be for our talent partners, especially in recruiting opportunities. So we have, for example, a leadership departure dashboard here. These will help us monitor for key positions like the product departures or sales departures. And we can monitor this data and see when interesting people are leaving the companies in our network. We can reach out to them. We could see if they're a good fit for our portfolio companies, reach out during their transition, and then make those introductions. So there's much more that you can do here, but I do want to highlight that this piece in particular, we can automate this as a weekly report. I can get it right in my inbox whenever I want, potentially before that Monday meeting, to make sure that I'm talking about these items with my team. And while you're able to set this up for yourself, with the enhanced support packages that Affinity is offering, you'll have a customer success manager with you to set up the dashboards and reports based on your customized workflows, as well as best practices that we see in the industry. So these are just some of the ways that we've seen this growth data utilized in the platform, both on the list side as well as in reporting. But I will go ahead and pass it back to Jen to wrap us up here. So I'm going to go ahead and switch screens again.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan. That was really informative. So last but not least, we wanted to provide you with a quick sneak peek into what Affinity data add-on packages are coming next. Organizations is just the first of many new add-on packages we'll be releasing, starting with 2 new data sets in early 2022. Our diversity and inclusion add-on will provide company founder D&I data to understand organization D&I metrics, and our talent insights data set will help teams identify and further understand the people in their network, showcasing their education and work history. These Affinity data add-on packages are currently in product alphas and will be releasing soon, so be sure to check back for more information. Next slide, please. We hope you got an idea of how powerful Affinity data is today, especially with these new capabilities unleashed with these company growth data insights. Today, we learned that Affinity data organizations can help teams confidently prioritize investments during early qualification, spot inflection points within on-hold opportunities, and support portfolio companies with talent placement while watching for emerging stars in your network. If you're new to Affinity or would like to learn a little bit more, I strongly encourage you to reach out to request a demo at www.affinity.co/demo. Our team will be happy to walk you through our CRM and the Affinity data add-on packages. And if you're a current customer, reach out to your CSM. They'll be happy to talk you through how you can add Affinity data organizations to your CRM instance. And with that, I'm going to wish you all a beautiful rest of your day. Thank Megan and Kat one last time for joining me, and pass it back to Michelle.
Great, thank you, Jen. Then thank you to Megan and Kat for the great discussion. So much exciting stuff coming out in the platform, and it's fun to get a deep dive on it. Thank you to everyone that joined us today. If you submitted questions that we didn't get to, we'll answer those offline. And if a question comes up later, you can always reach out to webinars@affinity.co and we'll get those answered for you. Thanks everyone and have a great day.